Hi, I'm Howard Botts, Chief Scientist at CoreLogic. I lead a team of hazard scientists, geospatial experts, and analytic modelers in developing hazard risk databases, working closely with insurers and their insured to help mitigate and understand hazard losses across the United States. One of the things we're most concerned about is uninsured and underinsured risk. And in particular, flood is the most underinsured risk that we're seeing today across the United States. Insurers largely pulled out of the U.S. flood market in the 1960s, given their inability to understand flood loss at a granular enough level to adequately price the risk. So lack of accurate data made underwriting these policies virtually impossible. In stepped the federal government with the National Flood Insurance Program, which created a series of surveyed boundaries, special flood hazard areas, which are essentially 1% annual risk, or also known as 100-year flood zones. Within these zones, it's mandatory if you have a federally insured mortgage that you acquire flood insurance, which covers flood up to $250,000. You can be 1 foot outside these zones and not require insurance, but low risk doesn't mean no risk. And unfortunately, this has led to significant uninsurance issues related particularly to hurricanes, with both the flooding from storm surge and the follow-up kind of inland flooding. In the case of Hurricane Harvey and others, 70% of all losses were uninsured. Flood is not a standard part of a U.S. homeowners policy. Floodwaters can come from many sources: hurricane-driven storm surge, high tide flooding, river flooding, and flash flooding or intense rainfall events. CoreLogic has developed high-resolution flood models which measure micro differences in elevation. Literally, one house next to another can have a completely different flood risk and flood damage. We also develop very detailed reconstruction cost models which take into account labor and material costs to reconstruct a home. Combining those two together allows us to understand under and uninsurance for all properties across the U.S. CoreLogic annually produces a report where we look at uninsured and underinsured flood losses across the United States. For our 2020 report, we looked at potential uninsured damage to homes along the Atlantic and Gulf coastal areas for hurricane-driven storm surge. We found that $218 billion of property was uninsured from flood risk and $5.2 billion underinsured. We also looked at the Mississippi River Basin and found $31 billion in uninsured property risk from flood and $70 million of underinsured risks. For more information on and underinsured properties across the U.S. at risk from flood, please see our 2020 annual report.